Great, thanks. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited to be part of this very prestigious speaker series. And I hope that this presentation brings about opportunities for dialogue and exchange of ideas about early childhood education. So to begin, what is it like to be uncertain? As a highly anxious person, I can attest to feelings of uncertainty as associated with anxiety or worry. Uncertainty can mean questioning or even undoing something we were fairly certain about, leading to even more unsettling feelings. In daily life, uncertainty is genuinely an uncomfortable state of being. However, uncertainty can also be generative in educational settings. Scholar John Dewey's concept of existential uncertainty in education as emerging from encounters with the unknown and the unpredictable are opportunities for authentic learning. Globally, policymakers are placing a growing emphasis on early childhood education. However, this attention often prioritizes economic benefits, standardization, and linear learning based on individualistic and assumed predictable development. Often this results in purchasing curricula developed by companies proclaiming science-based methods for teaching and learning, designed by those far removed from classrooms. Art making becomes in service to learning, such as for small motor skills or traditional academic subjects such as literacy or math. Instead, what if real art making reflects Atkinson's concept of experimentation, opening up potentials for new ways of doing, making, seeing, thinking, and feeling. We see this embracing of uncertainty as generative within the pedagogy created by the educators of Reggio Emilia, Italy. The Reggio Emilia approach began to take root after World War II, when the Italian Women's Union of Reggio Emilia sought to rebuild by creating schools for educating young children. They were interested in a pedagogical approach that pushed against fascist ideologies. How do we create conditions for poetic and artistic ways of knowing, including imagination, creativity, and embracing uncertainty to become an integral aspect of the everyday life of schools? Loris Malaguzzi and the early educators of Reggio Emilia proposed this question at the very beginning of their approach formation. In the late 1960s, artists known as Atelierista became integral within the schools to highlight the significance of expressive languages in building knowledge for adults and children. Children, teachers, and artists collaborate to explore the world through interconnectedness of expressive and transdisciplinary languages. The 100 languages is a metaphorical concept that views language as more than just a tool for communication, but also as the means for establishing a sense of identity, belonging, and well-being. The Reggio Emilia approach has grown over 60 years and offers different possibilities. With an educational philosophy grounded in neuroscience and social constructivism, inspired by John Dewey, Freire, and Brunner, education is central to social cohesion at all levels, with children, artists, educators, families, and the overarching municipality. The pedagogical approach emphasizes small group learning for both children and adults as a way of encouraging and supporting uncertainty. Reggio educators use the word confronto, which is not always easily translated in English. However, it refers to a pedagogical approach that values differences, diverse perspectives, and fostering collaborative learning environments for both children and educators. Engaging in constructive, sometimes disputes, contributes to the intellectual capacities of educators and children as researchers. Over the last several years, I've explored and interpreted the principles of the Reggio Emilia approach, first as a studio coordinator in the late 1990s for an inner-city child development agency called Chicago Commons, and later finding inspiration for change as an elementary art teacher, a community art educator, professional development provider, and higher education researcher. Every time I enter a new context, I always consider uncertainty as an important part of the work. Today, my hope is to share a window into 3 experiences with early childhood art education contexts where uncertainty is central to the pedagogy. So first, I'm going to begin with an excerpt from one experience with a public school context. I lost my job to a box. At the time, I was working as an early childhood art resource teacher for a pre-K 4 to 5-year-old program in a large school district. When the box decorated with a friendly owl appeared at the school district office, my stomach clenched, a premonition that my life would change. My colleagues opened it while I watched from a distance. Inside were neatly packaged lesson plans filled with predefined activities, organized by subject matter and arranged linearly. The plans even gave teachers what to say, what questions to ask, and how children should respond. The new curriculum appeared attractive for its efficiency, organization, and promise of making teachers' lives more manageable. For the school district, the box represented a way to control and measure what was taught. Decisions to purchase and implement prepackaged corporate curricula are generally made for teachers by those in leadership positions who are detached from the everyday life of classrooms. Curricular forms are often attached to what Cayo Perez et al. Describe as flavor of the day movements and held captive to politically motivated and inorganic reforms. This was particularly true of my school district, which faces many challenges and often ranks nationally at the bottom in child well-being and education. In response to these challenges, the school district opted classroom curricula developed by a large textbook company to provide structure and narrowly defined measurable incomes. My goal here is to share the approaches teachers and I cultivated before the packaged curriculum. Our approach, unlike the box curriculum, is an aesthetic approach that engages imagination, promoting teaching and learning through uncertainty. I was invited into the public school system through a metaphorical window of opportunity, an opening that existed briefly in time. In 2014, a visually stunning traveling exhibit from the early learning programs in Reggio Emilia, Italy, called The Wonder of Learning, the 100 Languages of Children, was on display at a local museum. The exhibit brought a great deal of attention to the Reggio Emilia approach, and new possibilities for early childhood curriculum were being discussed throughout the state. I was in a very unique position as the project manager for the exhibit. The public school early childhood program created and offered me a role, an early childhood art resource teacher, specifically to support the study of the Reggio Emilia approach. I was cautiously excited because often the artist teacher is seen as an outsider to the classrooms. I wondered if my new role would allow me to have a genuine impact in the classrooms. Would the teachers accept me as a collaborator, partner, and co-researcher? The further significant challenge was introducing the principles of the Reggio Emilia approach to an educational context like a public school system. Early childhood teachers interested in studying the Reggio Emilia approach applied to be part of a cohort. Through an application process, they shared their interests in going deeper with their teaching practices and investing in the time required for additional meetings and planning. To my surprise, 6 teachers initially applied. By the 3rd year, the cohort had grown to 10. As I began working with the teachers and children, I became cognizant of a number of challenges. First, there was the challenge of integrating into the daily life of multiple preschool classrooms located at very different elementary schools in different parts of the city. Creating a weekly schedule for each classroom felt like a magical act. Another challenge was maintaining a level of engagement with art materials and classroom studies when I was not present. There was no quick fix response to any of these challenges, and instead, processes were developed by the teachers and I. At the outset, I introduced myself slowly into the classrooms. I relied on my prior experiences with the Reggio Emilia approach and artistic training to bring a different perspective to the classrooms. Together, we revisited the environments, particularly the art centers, and redesigned them as studios for art making with small groups of children. Renaming them as art studios was a conceptual shift from art activities to artistic thinking and an emphasis on creation and process. Traditional early childhood materials such as crayons and markers were replaced by more sophisticated art media. Oil pastels, charcoal, wire, and water tube color paints, as an example. Each of these materials was intentionally introduced one at a time so teachers and children could discover their rich properties and potential. One teacher reflected, "I never considered using professional art materials with 4-year-olds. That was huge." As such, the art studios became relational spaces, moving art making from individual to social and collaborative practices. I worked simultaneously with teachers and children. Misrepresentation of the Reggio Emilia approach often leads to misunderstandings. In my experience, language frequently describing the Reggio Emilia approach are such things as following the child or child-led or a model or a curriculum. And this simplistic view leaves out the participation of teachers in the co-construction of classroom experiences. Foreman and Fife described the Reggio Emilia pedagogy as a process of negotiation, with provocations sometimes beginning with the teachers. The place to start can be teacher-provoked and child-engaged. What is important is the teacher engages children's minds and interests in the topic proposed. Reggio Emilia educators often refer to this as a game of catch played between teachers and children in a mutual exchange. However, I would say that teachers need support for working this way, as it is very different from traditional prescribed approaches. So eventually, the school district supported outside classroom time for reflection and planning meetings. This is also in response to teachers feeling less isolated from being in these very separate preschools in different school contexts. So together, we engaged in reflective planning cycle that included observing, documenting, collaborative reflection on documentation, hypothesizing, and planning. The circular rhythm allowed us to construct new experiences authentically tied to previous experiences. This is like a slowing down to embrace uncertainty in planning. As an art educator, I could call out children's unique approaches to the art media. Documentation in the forms of photography, video recordings, observational notes, children's works and words informed our processes. Through the documentation, we were learning too about how to slow down, pay closer attention, and to deeply listen to what children were saying and doing with materials at hand, which was sometimes very unanticipated things. According to Dahlberg, the documentation process helps teachers follow children's transformations and trajectories, and it forges relations and connections through which new becomings are produced. As such, the teachers and I learn from the children and also from each other. These meetings, these group meetings, offer the space for bridging professional knowledge between myself as an art resource teacher and the early childhood educator. Creating documentation panels was a collaborative process between the teachers and myself, a curation of images, words, and works telling the stories of classroom experiences. Teachers decided to hang the documentation panels in the hallways outside the classrooms for parents and other school members to see. Parents took notice of the panels as they dropped off children in the morning. Teachers began walking by and noticing the work, amazed, the visual stunning and compelling stories displayed. One preschool teacher described how the documentation panels changed the image of the preschoolers in the school. The other school members saw the preschool children walking in the hallway, and instead of saying, "Oh, they're so cute," they would say, "They're the children who did that amazing artwork in the hallway." Not only were others taking notice of the visual beauty of the documentation panels, but they also recognized the in-depth studies. One study in particular caught the attention of others in the school, called The Body as a Language. In addition to being a preschool teacher, Donna was also a professional dancer. Her knowledge and awareness of the body in relationship to space were woven into classroom studies. Working with her was a really important opportunity because she taught me how to pay careful attention to how young children explore, research, and make sense of the world through their whole bodies. One year, the children studied their body parts by observing up close with mirrors and drawing their unique attributes. Donna recalled the following steps: that focusing on the individual body parts, we thought about how to put the pieces back together to make the whole. In other words, children were encouraged to see the interconnections between the body parts and school processes, such as walking in the hallways. School spaces can also be fundamental protagonists. For many children in public school preschool programs, this is the first interaction with a public institution and its protocols. For example, we often ask children to do things like standing and walking in lines without having an understanding of their actions. Considering everyday experiences within school spaces with children through materials, pausing, reflecting, and paying closer attention encourage what aesthetic educator Maxine calls a wide awakeness and heighten awareness toward processes that might otherwise be overlooked. Here are a few examples of the way that children were interpreting how they perceived lines in the hallways and the process of lining up. In this example, you can see a child, this child is drawing the process of lining up and also calling attention to the materials used. This black paper with the white Conte crayon is a way to show up the process of moving through the lines. In this example, the child is using different gray scales or value scales to show a map of moving in line in the school. And the map, you can see that some areas are softer, where softer walking is happening in a line, or darker, where different kinds of lines are being represented, or different kinds of line and moving through the school are happening. These two examples show different ways that children were interpreting movement. One is movement in the school, where lines are very linear and straight. And then the other example, movement on the playground, where lines and movement are very, have a lot of organicness to them and a lot of movement to them. The children also studied how the older children moved through the hallways and lines. They asked the fifth graders, "Why are you in line?" And in turn, the fifth graders were a bit stumped at responding. We asked them, "Why are you walking in a line in the hallway?" And they told us, "So no one gets messed up. We have to follow the school rules. So no one gets hit by the doors and no one blocks the doorways." That's what the preschoolers remembered the fifth graders responding. And then, of course, there's always the coveted role of the line leader. Here's a conversation between two children about the purpose or the role of the line leader, where Ivan said, "Like you are in front." And then David responded, "Every time in front, you just pass through people. You make the lines, you concentrate." And then Ivan said, "When you are in front, you go ahead to the place first. I used to want to be the line leader, but not anymore. It's a job." So after realizing it's a job, he wasn't so interested. After noticing the children walking with purpose through the hallways, the teacher recalled others commenting, "Wow, your kids look so nicely in the hallway. How do you do that?" And Donna would respond, "Well, because they know it's their school. They know what they need to take. They know that they need to take care of our school." The children's awareness of walking in a line contributed to their understanding of themselves and relationship to others as citizens of the school. Well, unfortunately, after 6 years of the cohort, the early childhood program manager retired and a new administrator was appointed. Without a conversation or any opportunity to share our work, the new administration determined that a box curriculum was more appropriate for the program, falling back on the false certainties of the prescribed teaching. This led to the elimination of the early childhood art resource teacher position as well. For me, the abrupt change brought more questions than answers, such as how decisions are made regarding curriculum adoption and who deems what is meaningful learning. Also, what is the role of transparency in the action of those who make decisions? And what are the children's and teachers' perspectives? Are they ever considered? Also disregarded by prescribed curriculum is the importance of processes and time. It takes time to develop processes for enacting meaningful learning experiences. Atelierista Vecchi, former Reggio Emilia Atelierista, describes the aesthetic experience as freedom of thought, the sense of freedom that comes with aesthetic experiences that place uncertainty as a generative process is what children and educators miss out on most. The freedom to experience wonder, sustain curiosity, and to imagine alternative ways of being and learning is very significant, or the most significant of all. I also attribute the loss of the early childhood art resource position to the program's expansion, which tripled since my involvement. During the expansion, the program promoted a prescribed system-wide curriculum to be followed by all classrooms. And this way, this like set curriculum opposes the idea of uncertainty as being beneficial for teaching and learning. And it's also less about relational experiences. So what I've come to understand about Reggio Emilia is that the relationships between practices and their environment resemble in many ways the relationships between natural organisms and an ecosystem. They often refer to Bateson's ecological perspectives of aesthetics. For Reggio educators, this refers to a relation with things. This sensitivity is activated when the aesthetic dimension is significant in teaching and learning. So moving to a boxed curriculum took away this emphasis on aesthetics and learning, this interconnection of practices. The practices are considered as not living in isolation or directly transferable. However, practices grow in complexity as they become entangled with other practices and with other participants. This ecology of practices allows for embracing uncertainty because of their openness to change and adaptability in different contexts. Yet they remain stable ways of working with others. Reggio Emilia educators challenges that you can't uproot the approach from the Italian context and place it into another. However, the Reggio Emilia approach offers insight into ways of working with relationships. So now I continue to move on in this ongoing professional learning cycle as an early childhood art educator. I don't perceive the preschool experience as a failure, but as new knowledge for engaging with other contexts. So now I will share two more recent examples of my work investigating children and adults and materials entangled in meaning making within diverse art education contexts and institutions. As Sylvia Kind states, becoming with materials highlights the reciprocal generative nature as living languages that shape us as much as we shape them, how materials are joint participants in early childhood pedagogies. So first, along with art educators Holly Putnam and Shelley Corte, we have created workshops for young children and their caregivers at the Albuquerque Museum. The workshops cultivate a shared space for adults and children to develop and learn alongside each other. I will give you a window into some of the art pedagogies we have developed over the past 3 years that guide the 4-week workshops. Each session begins with a time to play with a curated selection of materials. And these materials change depending on what the exhibition is, what the current exhibition is at the museum. We encourage adults to experience the materials in this very open-ended way individually and also alongside the children. Often adults feel they need to regulate the children by assisting rather than working alongside them. As art educators, we ask, what if, instead, the space is for adults also to regulate themselves, to recognize their relationship with materials, while also allowing to be inspired by the children's art making? We often place questions, I'm going to go back to this slide, that are on the table to initiate dialogue between the adult caregiver and child regarding their processes. Again, our job as art educators is to curate and arrange experiences that offer a new way of seeing and working, as a new way of seeing these different affordances of these different kinds of materials. These opportunities for playing with materials culminate in experiences that become part of a more comprehensive project over the 4 weeks. We pay careful attention for emerging ideas that individuals are exploring and call out these connections to the broader group. So in this image, my colleague Holly, she shares 2 children's interpretations of a posture of one leg in front of the other. The children that created these pieces were at 2 separate ends of the studio and had no idea that they were both exploring the same posture. But so Holly called out this to everyone in the group as looking at these 2 different materials being used to create this kind of posture. We also connect the children and caregivers' art-making experiences with artworks within the museum by asking open-ended questions to allow the conversation to flow in multiple directions. Sometimes children are initially shy and they speak through their caregiver, reflecting a connection between the family and the museum, this entanglement of the family and the museum. Over time, the children become comfortable speaking independently within the group, and the caregivers also contribute to the conversation with their thoughts and ideas. In this experience, we actually had an opportunity to explore the space of the collections in the basement. The museum director offered an opportunity to visit the actual museum collections, as we were also studying this idea of what it means to collect. Throughout the 4-week workshops, we build a collaborative artwork between child and caregiver. Each week, we add new techniques to the artwork. In this sense, we confront the dichotomy between process and product that often exists in early childhood education. Loris Malaguzzi referred to this as aesthetic pleasure, when children's explorations of materials move to representation that leads them to find a finished form of expression. As the adult caregivers also come to recognize their own aesthetic capabilities and interests. So these are masks and these are portraitures that were created through a culmination of different experiences with materials over 4 weeks. And then the participants had the opportunity of posing with each other or on their own. So I think it's exciting to see the adults as wanting to be shine light on their art making as well. So lastly, I'd like to speak about the Collaborative Teachers Institute, which began in New Mexico in 2014 as a community of practice composed of over 80 early childhood educators, including classroom teachers, program directors, art educators, and museum and nature-based program educators. We consider the project in the schools of Reggio Emilia, Italy, as a catalyst for co-constructing our own ecology of practices to embrace the uncertainties of an ever-changing landscape of early childhood education in our state. Being together is an act of resisting isolation and also of coming together as an experience for educators. Educators develop inquiries unique to their context, and we use a protocol that I'm sharing on this slide for sharing documentation from classroom experiences at monthly meetings. And these monthly meetings happen in different contexts throughout New Mexico. Through research and documentation, educators work through trial and error through the support of other educators to develop approaches to investigations with children. An example of an in-depth study emerged with early childhood educators and a teaching artist at a Santa Fe public school. They asked themselves the question, how do we create yes spaces with 2-year-olds that allow for whole body explorations with charcoal? How can technology be used to build reflective practices and capture children's thinking and experiences? Here's some of the imagery that also look at shared spaces with children. You can see how the children are using the charcoal with their whole bodies. And I also think of this as an act of bravery by the teachers of working together through this uncertainty of what happens when we create this very open space in a school setting for children to utilize their bodies in this wholly with the material. Also, I would say that you notice that we're capturing the movement interactions between the children's bodies and the material as children are utilizing the whole space and their whole bodies. We also asked the question, what do 2-year-olds see and notice about the properties of charcoal? So in this video that I'm showing, we actually were able to acquire cameras that children were able to wear. And then we also captured what does this experience with charcoal look like from the child's perspective? What is their perspective? And in that video, I think we see this very immersiveness in the charcoal and this gentleness of the working with the charcoal from the child's perspective. So this is a concept map that reflects 20 weeks of collaboration and the interconnected ways children, artists, and educators researched alongside each other. And these results, this is another aspect of the Collaborative Teachers Institute, is that we often take these in-depth investigations and then create exhibitions, which is also something Reggio educators do. which I think is very valuable because you take that research from not just in the classroom, but then expand it out into public spaces where others can also learn from, like widening the circle of influence. Through CTI monthly meetings and also a summer institute, art and early childhood educators often explore materials in very diverse ways. And this slide you're seeing from the last Teachers Institute, we worked with University of South Carolina drawing professor Sarah Schneckloff, where she introduced drawing in this very in this way of embodied in ways of drawing, but also, which I think are also very similar to what we saw the children doing in the videos. So, and what we try to embrace in the CTI is that teachers too need experiences with materials and collaboration. We asked questions in this process, such as, how can our expectations, our internal perceptions of children, and our limited knowledge sometimes restrict our possibilities? And how do our limitations for seeing and experience art making limit what we do for children? So these material opportunities for teachers, they help to expand what might be possible with the material. If the tendency is to see only what is in our field of vision, then the imperative is to expand our vision and learn to see that which lies beyond the familiar. And that's a quote from Tellurisa Sylvia Kind, who this seeing, this opportunity to go beyond the familiar of the material and the possibilities. So I'd like to end here and also think about this quote from Loris Malaguzzi, in which he states that teaching is a profession of uncertainty, and that uncertainty can be turned into something positive when we start to test it and start to see it as a ferment of knowledge. That's a very important quote, I think, for us to think about. How might we, and some of these questions that I have displayed also about how we might actively seek and confront situations with children that are not always easily discernible, or sometimes we think are easily discernible, but approach them in this way of we're not certain what's really happening in this space. How do children approach situations that might be different than adults? Might they have other ways of interpreting the world that could be different possibilities? And also, how do we create spaces that value confronto in early childhood education contexts, the valuing of different perspectives? And that's it. Thank you.